Yeah, all right, Spocko. Thank you, Mucho. Little McCoy and Spock, good guys. I always loved those guys. They were a great team. And now let's bring on another great man who forms the team tonight. He is Eric Peters. Live long and prosper and Schlaka and all that other stuff, Eric. How are you? Good to see you. How are things over where you are, buddy?
There are okay, guards. I'm glad that I've got a good memory for old Star Trek shows. Do you remember dialogue from the Omega Glory?
Yeah.
I think we're going to be living that soon.
Yeah.
The E Pligmista. Remember that?
Absolutely.
You were mentioning a couple of minutes ago before we went on about Bessent and Hazlitt.
Yeah.
I actually think that he probably has read it. I don't think these people are ignorant. I think they're evil. At the end of the day, I don't think that these are just, we didn't really know what we were doing. We meant well. Think about the pattern behind all of this stuff. That's been going on for decades. It's not recent.
Yeah.
After a while, you can kind of pull the thread together and see the data points and how they all connect. We had Trump for 4 years, and then we had 2020 COVID, which led to Joe Biden, right? And they immiserated us for 4 years. And then in comes Trump to save us on his white Charger. And now, of course, he's proven to be multiple times worse than George W. Bush ever was. And what do you suppose the backlash from that is going to be? You see the trend, what's happening? So, I have a friend that I used to talk about this stuff with. And, I used to talk to him about George W. Bush. And I said, we're going to end up with something far worse. We did. We got Obama, and what do you suppose we're going to get if there's anything still left?
Yeah.
In 2 years from now. And, while I was listening to you talk about the debt and these other things, I was focusing on a metric in my little world that I think bears on this. That's relevant, which is the cost of diesel. I got some stats for you here. So currently the national average for diesel is about $5.45. You know what it was back in January?
What?
$3.52.
Wow.
And it's going up. This is starting to become, it's starting to dawn generally, about, we've had the gas thing now for months. The diesel thing is starting to kind of percolate up. They call it the crack, the cost, the cost of producing diesel. Yeah, the spread out of the column of refining tree and stuff like that. This is going to be the end point, I think. The thing that's going to put paid to the economy, probably. If the interest rate thing doesn't do it, if the debt thing doesn't do it, this is going to do it, because of the effect that it's going to have on food production, on commercial trucking, on every type of transport that you can imagine. Diesel electric locomotives. Think about what it costs to get things from A to B. Thinks about the cost of fertilizer, all of these things. We're headed into fall now. Heating oil. A lot of people heat their homes with oil, the same type of oil, basically. And this is going to be potentially horrendous. And I don't see a way to prevent it from happening at this point. God help us all.
No, I agree with you 100%, Eric. Eric Peters is our guest, everyone. The Russians are saying big thumbs up in their great Cyrillic language. Eric, I just want to say, let me ask you this. Given what they did with the Japanese yen, and they circuitously did it by selling off a bunch of euros to buy the yen rather than using dollars to do it. But given what they saw, which was it didn't maintain the yen itself, the rates just went right back up. What do you think was going through Bessent's mind and the other people at Treasury as they discussed and then decided to enact this policy, which again, this is the trigger. I don't think people, unless they follow this stuff, I don't think people might understand just what this is signifying for the economy, what happened over the past few days here with these bonds. Because this is, again, a mimic of what was happening in 2007, 2008 before the big collapse.
Yeah.
And it's happening now. And they're the ones who revealed it. It's like move that bus on, the makeover edition on, the home makeover thing. Move that bus. They just moved the bus. And so what do you think they were thinking of if they saw that it didn't maintain things in Japan? Did they think it was going to work, or what are they doing? Do you think they're really chaos agents and they want the whole thing to collapse? Because obviously that's what was going to happen if they did this.
That's my take. To get back to the maliciousness angle, I think all of this is calculated. It's deliberate. Now, what the whole plan is, who knows? But Trump clearly is in political trouble. That's obvious, right? All indications are that the midterms are going to be a disaster for the Republican Party. And, Trump probably understands on a personal level that if the Senate and the House end up going the other way, that he might personally be held accountable for some of the things that are going on. And that kind of begs the question, well, maybe there won't be elections. He's even hinted at that. He's hinted, that there's such a crisis in our electioneering, in our laws, that he may just have to step in to, make sure that fraud doesn't happen. I could see something like that happening, particularly if there's an economic crisis on the one hand, and then perhaps a military crisis on top of that. He's stymied in Iran. Now he's talking about what was the idiot phraseology that he uses, an economic D-Day or something like that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and we're going to get, and nobody says, well, obviously, then you admit you lost, right? Militarily, you lost.
Right.
You've given up trying to bomb them, at least with conventional weapons. So now what are you going to do? You're going to try to deploy these economic weapons at the Iranians. Good luck with that, because they can afford to outweight us, I think.
Right. Yeah.
I'm worried. The thing that really concerns me the most right now is that he's fulminating and waiting for the opportunity to drop a nuke on the Iranians.
I worry about that a lot. Yeah. And
the predicate.
Did you get to see Robert Barnes chatting yesterday with Nima Al-Khorshid of Dialogue Works? Because Robert,
unfortunately, I missed it.
Yeah, so Robert was very close to the Trumpers, and of course with Alex Jones and stuff like that. Sort of he went off on his own, did a lot of stuff with Viva Frei and everything. And Robert's got a very good legal mind and these connections. And he's saying, Trump's mental state is very different than what it was 6 years ago. And he's saying he is worried about Donald Trump's mental state. I also worry about Benjamin Netanyahu, because if Netanyahu thinks he's going to lose the election, Netanyahu's got cancer. I don't think, Netanyahu is such a criminal that I think that he would have a lot fewer barriers to the idea of the use of tactical nuclear weapons, which of course the Israelis definitely have. And for what? I don't, what's the answer after that?
To escalate it. And by the way, most people don't realize that in Israel, Netanyahu is considered to be something of a moderate.
Right.
The person who replaces him could be even more psychotic, even more belligerent.
Yeah.
And the whole point of it is that Iran has thrown a cream pie in the face of Israel and Trump. That's fundamentally what the war is about at this point. It's about prestige and saving face. It sounds batty. Like grown men can't accept it. Okay, it is what it is. We lost. Deal with it. Let's make the best of it. Their fragile egos and their prestige are on the line at this point, and they just can't stand the idea that the Iranians have done this. And of course, there are other implications too. I mean, effectively, American power has been kicked out of that area. It's been made abundantly clear that that's it. You guys get your bases out of here. You're done.
Yeah,
and that's a problem for the great hegemon, isn't it? And it's a problem for Israel also.
Yeah.
So what's the next step then? What are they going to do? If the economic D-Day doesn't work, they've come to realize that the Iranians, smart guys that they are, they're not sand people. They're pretty smart people. They created these vast underground networks that are essentially immune to conventional bombs. So what are they going to do? Hit them with a nuke? That they think in their flailing desperation, they might do something like that. I agree with you. I think Trump's mental state, again, unless it's all some kind of a stupid act, and I have difficulty believing that. I think a lot of this is genuine.
Mm-hmm.
He just comes across to me as an extraordinarily juvenile personality,
right?
Thin-skinned, petty, vindictive, mean guy. And I think that, like the devil, he cannot bear to be mocked. I saw something the other day that came out of Iran where they said Trump can't control his bowels. How is he going to control the Strait of Hormuz? And you can imagine if Trump saw that, he's probably, you remember the stories about Nixon, supposedly getting drunk and wandering the halls of the White House, kind of railing at the pictures of his predecessors.
Yeah.
Trump is many times worse than that, I think.
Yeah. The narcissistic, sociopathic tendencies run hand in hand, and they are skyrocketing. Obviously, anybody who's dealt with someone who has mental deficiencies as they get older, in many cases, especially with something like Alzheimer's, the core tendencies of those people tend to come through. So if you've got a very kindly person, they'll start to act sort of childish, and they'll still be very, very friendly, but forgetful. If you got a belligerent sort of sociopathic person like Trump, they become very crude and nasty and harsh, and they'll take offense to any little slight. Even if it's not a slight, they'll see it as a slight. The psychology of it is, I think, becoming clearer by the day, and it's extremely dangerous. In fact, let me go to the news notes, Eric. I'm going to light up like a Christmas tree here for a second, but I want to go over to the website and show inside my news notes, we've got your piece, The Madness of King Trump, EP Autos. I'm going to link over to that right now over there, and also recommend that people pick up, of course, some great merchandise at your store and get some awesome stuff. And I don't say that as a flip thing, because they're really, really cool. Let's go to this. Right at the top, you've got this: AI Donald Trump and AI George Washington riding horses together. That put out by Donald Trump, of all things. Now, I'm sure the whiskey rebels might agree, because they weren't fans of George Washington, and Washington broke the Constitution. But Trump is many, many times worse. Tell us a little bit about what inspired you and what you put into this piece, Eric.
Well, do you remember, sometimes I find that pop culture provides a useful touchstone to help understand things. Remember the movie about King George III, The Madness of King George?
Yes.
And I thought that was a way to explore this topic. So we've got these are things that Trump had put out. I don't think he personally is capable of generating memes on his own. He's got that 27-year-old chick who hangs out with him all the time that's probably creating those things. The point is, he and she, so you've got this 80-year-old guy sitting there with a 27-year-old girl creating these ridiculous memes that anybody, who is in their right mind, an adult man, would look at that. I mean, he's the president. Can you imagine? Imagine George Washington, during the dark days of the Revolutionary War. Imagine if after he was driven out of New York, lost that battle, he was somehow using the technology of the time to have these infantile caricatures of, the British king and various other people, or himself, sent out to people. The immediate reaction would have been, well, George has lost his mind.
Yeah.
He has to be relieved of command. We should put him in a facility somewhere, a home. I don't know what they had back in those days, a lunatic asylum, I guess, and put somebody possessed of sanity in charge of the army. That he has time to do this. I mean, consider the crises, the manifold myriad crises that are, just popping up like whack-a-mole now every day.
Right,
and
exactly.
The president of the United States is spending time going over memes and putting out memes on his social media that make him look like an idiot and make, by proxy, us look like idiots, because after all, he is the leader of the country. It's funny, if Washington were around, I'm not the greatest fan of Washington, but I respect Washington. He was a serious guy.
Right.
And if he were to somehow come alive today, he would be, at a word that he used often, mortified by Trump.
And you noticed that you said, try if you can imagine Washington having flunkies draw up little sketches of himself in preposterous scenarios and having them published while he was on the run from the Battle of Long Island, when he and his troops were beaten by the British. The Continental Congress likely would have rescinded his command on the basis of mental debility. And you also write this: where is Congress now? Yeah. And then this is one of the key things. And then I want to go back to the
party. That's the most interesting aspect of it. We had this period during 2024, during the election season, when it was abundantly clear that Joe Biden had kind of crossed that Rubicon and was headed into the second childhood. Very obvious. But you had these party ideologues and the apologists for the Democrats who just pretended that what was right before their lying eyes wasn't there. We were all supposed to pretend that, oh, he's fine. This 80-year-old man, he's okay, he's fine. And of course, that cost them the election, and it cost them a whole lot of credibility too, because the party of democracy just shoved Kamala Harris in there. Again, I don't like those people, but the point is, they're supposed to be the party of democracy, and they didn't give their rank and file members or anybody any opportunity to put in a candidate that maybe they preferred. The party bosses decide we're just going to pick Kamala Harris. She's our person. Put her in there. And now these Republicans are doing the same thing. They've tied themselves to Trump so tightly that they're going to go down with Trump when Trump goes down. And, I think possibly this could be the end of the Republican Party. Nothing lasts forever, including political parties. And the Whig Party is there.
Yeah.
And I think that the Republican Party has destroyed, shattered whatever credibility it may have had. To get back to what you began the show with, fiscal responsibility to some extent was once kind of a bedrock GOP party platform talking point. We're the party of restraint. We're going to make sure that the debt doesn't explode. We're $40 trillion in the hole now.
Unbelievable. It's absolutely crazy. And the amazing thing is how much ammunition they have given to the left wingers, even with this fatuous, ridiculous claim that anybody who's against genocide is somehow a communist. I mean, talk about a broad brush that doesn't help your argument, because they've got no argument.
The apologists, I like to listen to the apologists. So today, coming home from the gym, I was listening to these guys, Clay and Buck. Are you familiar with them?
No.
The Clay and Buck show?
No.
They're kind of like young Sean Hannity and young Glenn Beck.
Oh.
So they were talking about data centers, and they were trying to explain why people don't like data centers. And they just obtusely refused to even mention the whole idea of data being collected. What is the purpose of the data? Why are they collecting all this data? They kept talking about, it's about people don't want to have this, this big commercial thing in their backyard, but we've got to do it because after all, if we don't, the Chinese are going to win the AI race. That's the talking point, right?
Oh, of course. And they never even define what exactly that race is, right? They just lap up the terminology. I mean, again, it's like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. They give all these brickbats to people. In Hitchhiker's Guide, they got aboard this ship that was filled with this useless third of the population from this planet. And they had given them all these fake stories to get them aboard this ark to get them off the planet. And so the two main characters end up stuck on this ship with a bunch of nincompoops that nobody wanted around. And all these nincompoops are talking to each other like, so, the planet was going to get destroyed. That's why we got on the ark. Or we were going to get eaten by a giant mutant star goat. And then another guy goes, well, that's not what I was told. I heard our sun was going to explode. And then another guy's like, that's not what I was told. And then they all realize they all were given other, lines of BS to get them aboard the ship. And that's exactly what they constantly do all the time here. And even their criticism of their opponents overlooks the fact that they've got no argument. So they paint these people as necessarily communist Marxists as somehow different than what they are as collectivists, which is collectivists. Then the AI data centers, they won't even we got to beat the Chinese. At what? What's the purpose? What are you talking about?
No tie-in with the flock camera thing at all. No mention of any of that. And then they came up with another thing that I thought was, I almost had to pull over just kind of, recover myself listening to them. It was such a weak and sad argument. They were trying to draw some sort of equivalence between the Democrats squawking in the last election cycle about threats to our democracy. Remember the threats to our democracy? Oh. And they said, well, no. The Clay and Buck were saying, well, now the Democrats' new call is affordability, as if there's something illegitimate about the fact that we're being. I don't want to use bad language. Taken advantage of in the posterior. Let's put it that way. As if this is the Clay and Buck are multimillionaires. Of course, they're well paid to shill, right? So for them, they're so tone deaf. I think they're tone deaf or evil. Which is it? Like that they don't get how hard it is now for people to just pay bills. What working and middle income people are dealing with right now in terms of just basic stuff. Go to the store and see and find out what affordability means.
Eric, you weren't here, but on Monday I went through a couple things on Friday and then on Monday and then again yesterday, the day before. Both Stephen Moore, who has been with the Wall Street Journal and, has been an economic advisor to Trump and things like that. And I met Stephen. He's a nice guy. But Stephen gets on there and starts talking about how affordability has gone up for Americans. And so I said,
That's
you're
great.
not including well, he didn't include the unemployed. He's on Fox News. He's on with that British guy. I can't remember his name.
Piers?
What is it?
Piers Morgan?
No, it's not Piers. It's another guy. He might be Australian. I can't remember. He's an older guy. And but he's on there and he's saying, oh, yeah, affordability, working Americans can afford more. I was like, dude, you're giving the caveat right there. Why don't you crack that open and find out if you actually include the unemployed no, affordability is not going up. Prices are going up.
Talking about the employed.
Yeah.
I mean, everything just about that matters. There are some trivial things that are, I guess, somewhat more affordable.
Right.
But this economy is fundamentally a Wall Street casino.
Exactly.
If your wealth is tied to stocks and all these other things that the very affluent, and I'm not farthest thing from a communist. I'm not faulting people who have money. I'm simply saying that, most working and middle income people aren't stock market moguls. They're not able to, to short stock and engage in all these grifts and grafts,
right.
To cash in and to make $1 million or $50 million, overnight on a trade. That's not the reality that probably 90% of America has to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. It's astounding. And then Larry Kudlow, he's doing the same line as those talk hosts. They talk about all these things that just, if you even take a second, like, for example, Lawrence Kudlow was talking about how this quarter, I put it in my news notes, something had improved. And I was like, compared to what? Are you going quarter to quarter? Well, why don't you go year to year? What's your time frame? Nothing. It's like, why are you even putting your face on the screen if you're going to offer that information and not give it with any sort of context? I mean, people aren't stupid. Well, maybe a lot of people watching Fox aren't, maybe they're distracted, but people aren't stupid. So hopefully they're recognizing just how deceptive these people are. And again, Eric, with this move that they did with these bonds, I hope people understand the significance. This is a mountain of U.S. economic history right now. Now. There's nothing that compares to this in the past 18 years since 2008. This is that bad. This is so bad. The only thing that you might compare it to is the lockdowns, which they could have avoided. They did it intentionally. And I think you're right. I think the chaos agents, I don't know where they're going to try to go with this, but they had to have known that they couldn't sustain this by using short bonds to buy the long bonds and thinking that they were going to somehow keep the rates down.
This is much more subtle than COVID and the lockdowns. Everybody understood what was going on when the lockdowns happened. This is much more subtle, but I wanted to address one final thing to get back to what we were talking about a little bit. The most affronterous part is they don't acknowledge the tragedy of it when these clowns start talking about affordability and so on. The tragedy that none of this had to happen. That Trump rode into office promising that he was going to focus on the concerns of Americans, that he was going to do things to make energy more affordable. Remember that? Cue the Lee Greenwood song. You're going to be paying 50% less for your energy bills. He said that.
Yep.
And instead, he got us into this stupid, catastrophic war that was totally unnecessary. People are furious about that, understandably. This was not something that had to happen. It was something that was chosen. And the fact that it was chosen is why it's so awful. There's no reason why we should be paying $4.30 a gallon for gas. We were paying $2.85 for gas last Christmas.
Right.
So,
but look at it this way too. He didn't have to do his tariffs. He could have learned, in his first administration, I wrote, I don't know how many articles about how awful those tariffs were. And he did it again. He did it last year to the tune of $300 billion.
He keeps on doing it.
It's insane. It's absolutely crazy. Let me show you. This is interesting. I've got this from 2016. I'll bring down your volume. I probably don't have to do that now with the new changes over on Rumble. I mean,
I'll be quiet. I don't say anything.
Yeah, over on StreamYard, I don't think I have to do it, but I'll just bring this down for a second. So check this out, Eric. Let's see. This is Trump from 2016, August 19, 2026. The national debt exceeded 40 trillion.
Because
this is 2016 because he was so alarmed about the debt.
Because we really do have to get going. Because if we have another 3 or 4 years, we're at 18 trillion now. We're soon going to be at 20 trillion. According to the economists, who I'm not big believers in, but nevertheless, this is what they're saying, that 24 trillion, we're very close. That's the point of no return. $24 trillion. We will be there soon. That's when we become Greece. That's when we become a country that's unsalvageable. And we're going to be there very soon. We're going to be there very soon.
Yeah, well, I guess he definitely knew how to deliver us right to that, didn't he? I guess somebody must have put something in his soup. Maybe he got a bad ice cube. I don't know. What do you think of that?
I don't think so. I've really come to the conclusion that all of this is deliberate, that he was playing a role, that he was saying what people wanted to believe, and they bought it. And it was for purposes of demoralization in part. That's what's happened, right? I mean, everybody is just throwing up their hands in exasperation. The system has lost all legitimacy. The extent of the graft and corruption that's going on right now, right in our faces, is even worse, if such a thing is possible, than what happened under the 4 years of Joe Biden.
Yeah.
We've got the president of the United States basically selling his, access to his social media posts. Did you catch that? So that if you're if you're a market manipulator, you'll get a special advance warning that he's going to say something that's going to affect the markets, so that you can cash in on that.
Incredible. And the thing that gets me is, again, this just gives so much fodder and fuel to the left-wing fire of they utilize the anti-corporate, the natural tendency to say corporations exploit people, they work with each other, they're cronies and all that stuff, to then, just like Marx did, attack any concept of free markets, private property, and not redistributing wealth, because they say there's already an imbalance. We need to somehow come in and fix the imbalance because we care about the people who've been exploited. And it puts you right back to 1848 and Karl Marx. It's so bad. It puts
you back to 1789, doesn't it? I mean, Trump is a kind of spray tanned, obese Marie Antoinette without the appealing attributes,
Okay.
And we know what happened in France. And Marie Antoinette, personally, the sad thing is, she was just kind of a courtier, probably not a bad person. Somebody who grew up in that world, and so had no sense at all of what life was like outside of the palace, what ordinary people were dealing with. She was just caught up by history. And the same for, Louis, her husband. I don't think, from all I've read, Louis was not an evil man. He was just an inept man. Trump is evil.
Yeah. He clearly is. Eric, I want to turn to you. Have this piece over here on the site. Talk about the evil of Trump. Trump kills a Lincoln. Tell us a little bit about this Lincoln Nautilus.
A little snarky with the headline, but this gets us back to the topic of tariffs, which are taxes, of course. I love the way they just use this etymological jujitsu to manipulate the way people think about things. Instead of calling a tax, they call it a tariff. We all know that it's a tax that's applied to a corporation that then makes us pay for it. But at the end of the day, you still pay for it.
Right.
So essentially, Lincoln, or Ford, which is the parent company, was building one of their SUVs, the Nautilus, in China. And, you can make a lot of hay out of that if you're Trump. If you're rah-rah, Lee Greenwood, we got to bring manufacturing back to America. So he imposes heavy tariffs on this particular vehicle, as well as others. I just use this as an example to make the point. And Ford has said, well, if we can't manufacture this vehicle in China, where it costs less to manufacture, and so, it's going to end up costing us too much, so we're gonna not import the thing anymore. And Trump claims that this is some kind of wonderful victory. The problem is, all it means is that the less expensive option is going to be denied to Americans. And the idea that we're going to build them here, sure, fine, they're going to cost more, and we're going to continue to pay more. You talk about inflation in car prices. The average price paid for a new car is now pushing $53,000. $53,000. And this is a function in part of regulatory compliance costs, manufacturing costs, the fact that it's extremely expensive to make things, in this country because of the costs of all of the federal ukase, all the stuff that a business, especially a manufacturing business, has to deal with. That's why they left this country and went to places. I mean, think about it. It's actually less expensive to make a vehicle in China on the other side of the world and then put it on a ship and have the ship sail all the way across the ocean to the United States. And they can still do that. And it's cheaper for them to do that than to make the thing right here in the United States. So the point I'm trying to get at is that unless the regulatory compliance stuff is addressed, all this does is close off the market to less expensive alternatives and raises the cost of everything. Trump did the same thing, by the way, with little incidental things. A lot of people who can't afford pills in this country would get pills from India and various other places around the world. Well, now they're too going to be subject to all sorts of restrictions and taxes and so on. So you'll be forced to buy the more expensive made in the USA.
Oh. And you know what I love is, and even people like Larry Kudlow and others, they come up with these claims. They say, well, Trump reduced prices for pharmaceuticals. And it's like, no, what Trump did was he, through Medicare and Medicaid, leveraged the government purchasing, the strength of the government purchasing, and then threatened these pharmaceutical companies that if they didn't lower prices for the government programs, then they were going to get shut out and have heavy tariffs and be fined and so on and so forth. And so what does that do? Well, it pushes up the prices for anybody who pays out of his own pocket because they got to make up that cost somewhere. And they keep making these claims. Oh, we make prescription drugs more affordable. No, what you did was you used your corporate government fascist power to coerce the people who make the drugs, who already are under the gun from the FDA, and then they try to game the system one way or another. So it's a further gaming of the system for your Medicare and Medicaid recipients, whom are going to receive probably something from me if they live long enough that goes past what they even put into it. And now the cost of the pharmaceuticals that would have been charged to them will now be charged to me. Thanks so much.
Yeah, isn't it great?
It's amazing. It's just it, and they make it. The amazing thing is, I remember when Clinton would say stuff like that, right? Oh, we made this more affordable for this and this. It's like, no, all you did was shift costs. That's all you do. Government can't make anything more affordable unless government gets out of the way. And your point about the Lincoln is a perfect example. I remember when I was a kid, talking about how all the regulations on the major auto companies like Chrysler and GM, when Lee Iacocca was getting the bailouts, it was like, they wouldn't have needed a bailout if the United States had not started decades ago with all these tariffs and then protected Chrysler, added all the burdens that they favored their unions from the UAW because they were so big from basically, the 40s, 50s, and 60s on for any presidential or gubernatorial candidates, especially in those regions like Michigan. And they got huger and huger and added all these burdens like retirement and Medicare and, medical care and stuff for the auto industry. So, of course, they're going to be less expensive if you can build them in Mexico or China or something like that. Why wouldn't they move away? And the other thing that gets me too, Eric, is just on the basic, there are two things I want to mention to you. One is on the basic economics of this, because, again, people have this sort of innate nativist concept that somehow the jobs are lost if some person says, you know what, I've got a portion of my line of manufacturing here that I will get built over there because I can get it for half price. And the American will say, well, that's an American losing a job. It's like, no, that's you telling an American he's got to spend more money on something now he doesn't have the money left over. It's like telling me I can't go to my neighbor to have him chop wood if I'm really bad at chopping wood. And I could do something else that I'm good at, like maybe a podcast or something. It's so stupid. It's so contrary to just fundamental human ethics and economics. It's so bad, but they keep buying it.
It takes away the pressure of the alternative, which is a healthy pressure.
Yeah, right. Well stated. Yeah.
way to look at this. And I want to go back to talking about what you were talking about a moment ago, because this is something that a lot of people aren't aware of. So what happened in the early 70s with regard to the car industry was that the United States government stuck its nose in the Middle East and got involved in a war over there that resulted in the energy crisis.
Right.
Remember the energy crisis? So all of a sudden, gas that had been extremely affordable no longer was. And right around the same time, the government started imposing fuel economy standards on vehicles. That really hurt Detroit. Detroit, you can't turn on a dime in the car business. So, at that time, we're talking the early mid 70s. At that time, American cars tended to be big, rear wheel drive, have 6-cylinder or V8 engines. The Japanese at that time, because after all, Japan had been decimated during the war, destroyed practically, they specialized in small, front wheel drive, highly efficient little cars that got good gas mileage. They were naturally advantaged by that.
Right.
So that's why they sold, and that's why they were cheaper, because they were naturally compliant with the regs. You had a Datsun B210 or a Honda Civic that already got 30 something miles per gallon, and it was at a huge competitive advantage relative to some, Detroit Dreadnought that got 13 miles per gallon.
Right.
But my point is, all of this was the result of these artificial injections and interferences with the market. If none of that stuff had happened, there never would have had to have been a bailout. There probably would have been sort of a leveling effect. You would have had Japanese cars would have come in and they would have done okay because they would have been an alternative to the big boats.
Sure.
Just like the early Beetle did well before all of this happened, because there are always going to be people who want just a basic, simple little car that gets pretty good gas mileage, just as there's some people who want a bigger car. Let the alternatives compete for people's dollars. That's what I'm in favor of. But instead, we've got these people who always have to put their own big fat thumb on the scale and use the government to deny people the alternatives. Another right now thing that's going on is, remember Trump was talking about, we're going to have the tiny cars. It's going to be great. The tiny cars. Where are the tiny cars? They're kind of, I guess, where the Doge $5,000 rebate checks are.
Right.
Forget all this tariffs and taxes stuff. Why not just let these little cars come into the market and let people have the option to, if they want to, buy a new car that costs $10,000 and let that be the alternative to these $50,000 cars that that people are being crushed by. Imagine that. Imagine paying $800 a month for a car payment for the next 6 years, plus the insurance, plus the taxes, plus the fuel.
I keep seeing these ads on YouTube for, I lowered my insurance rates to such and such and such and such, by using this app or whatever. And I think to myself, I would never even pay your discounted rates. I've got a used car. I'm paying as little as possible. And I also want to mention, Eric, when we look at the Trump administration and one sees these corrupt figures and, mention of Trump Trump offering people that split second advance on Truth Social to get his posts, that sort of stuff. And the number of corporations in which Trump or family members have been invested, whether it's Geo Group or Axon or anything like that. And I want to go back to your piece on the madness of King Trump, because in here, as you mentioned, you got George Washington and Trump, right? And George Washington and Trump. And as you mentioned, you made your point about, imagine if the people in the Continental Congress had seen George Washington on retreat coming up with these cartoon images of him as a great hero. And something that struck me in seeing this image that I think might be important, however, is to place it within context. Obviously, much worse now, much deadlier for more people now. The economic consequences are much, much worse. And the ethics of the two men, far different. However, I think it's important to keep in mind, and I mentioned, and I've done this before, I mentioned the Whiskey Rebellion. And if we think about the corruption of people close to Trump, and then we think about the corruption of people who also get close to George Washington, we can see that even Washington was not insulated from that, because Alexander Hamilton got close to Washington and he played with a lot of his friends to buy those war bonds. And then he worked to usurp the Articles of Confederation, replace them with the Constitution, the very ruling document for the new government. He had it replaced, and they were able to create a central bank and a central taxing authority of tariffs and the excise tax. And it was Washington who led an unconstitutional military raid on Western Pennsylvania to collect the tax. And he did it through an unconstitutional claim by a friend of Hamilton's who was a judge, saying that there was an insurrection in Pennsylvania when that was supposed to have been, according to the Constitution, a request made by the legislature of the state or the governor. So we can see, even in that picture, there's an opportunity to learn that all was not lily white and pure and clean. There were corrupt, cronyist, fascist people back then, and they got close to Washington, and Washington did the wrong thing.
Yep. Who's the new boss, right?
Yeah.
I think King George would have considered Washington an insurrectionist. That's the first point. And the second point, to get back to what you mentioned with regard to Hamilton, that scumbag.
Yeah.
What they did was they bought up at almost nothing, these revolutionary war chits that, by and large, were held by ordinary Americans.
Right. Patriotic people.
Worthless. Right. Yeah. And then wheedling the influence that he had over Washington and thus over the federal government, they managed to get Congress to assume these debts and to pay them at face value. I think it was. So now the people who bought him up, for pennies on the dollar, became massively wealthy on the back again of these poor average people who got gypped. So this sort of grift, it goes on. It's been going on from time immemorial. It's nothing new. It's the same as it's always been. And it's necessarily a function, inevitably. This is the thing I harp on all the time. You do too. How does it happen? It happens because we transfer somehow. We as a people somehow think it's okay to transfer coercive power to a group of people to rule us. This is something that could never happen if it were just us as individuals. My neighbor has no power, to come over to and take money out of my pocket. He could try, but I can defend myself against him, right? But I can't really defend myself against the county when they send me a letter telling me my property tax bill is due.
Absolutely. And, Eric, you speak of the power of principle. That's so important. It's so important. Next to understanding that we were created by God, sticking to those principles, it's so important because we're only here for a certain period of time. And if we can look at some of those good heroes and stand on their shoulders and try to stand up for principle, that's why it's so great to talk to you. And obviously I'll say hi to the people in the chat with the same sort of sentiment. And it's not fatuous. It's not empty rhetoric in any way whatsoever. To be able to be here and associate with people who are, people who believe in the right thing. It's
here's a thought. A lot of people, in this country are still Christian, at least nominally, right?
Yeah.
That's still the majority religion. And what is one of the fundamental tenets of that religion? Essentially, it's the golden rule, right?
Right.
I mean, it's said in various ways, but ultimately it is this idea of leaving other people alone, treating them decently as you would like to be treated yourself. And that excludes coercion, doesn't it?
Exactly.
All human interactions that are coercive are on the face of it immoral. If you choose to be friends with somebody, you choose to marry somebody, you choose to be in business with somebody, you have the choice. And implicit in that is you have the choice not to be if it doesn't suit you. And this whole idea that it used to be the thing that underlay what this country was all about, live and let live. You don't have to like what somebody else is doing. Just leave them alone. As long as they're not hurting you or somebody else, leave them alone. And by dint of that, expect them to leave you alone. How is that so difficult for people to understand?
It's amazing. And you know what? And it's really, I won't even go any further into it. In fact, I was about to mention over at your site, Eric, you know how your window comes up with some other stories from the past that people might find interesting. There was actually a picture of Robert Rubin and from one of your old articles. And I was thinking about how Hamilton and what he did with those people who bought up the war bonds was so similar to what Robert Rubin did when he entered the Clinton administration as Treasury Secretary and then got the bailout for Mexico because Goldman Sachs had so much invested in Mexico that if Mexico didn't pay off its bills, Goldman Sachs would have gone under. So they gave him $14 billion in like the first half of the year of the first Clinton administration. So it was amazing. It strikes me that these mendacious people are, in every generation. And again, even the usurpation of the Constitution, as much as people admire it, at the time, there were many people who were very, very principled people who recognized what was going on at that time. And,
Well, so people were told, that one of the, again, kids are taught about how we live in a democracy, representative democracy.
Yeah.
Well, that was anything but. What happened was representatives were authorized to tweak the Articles of Confederation. That's what they were sent to do. They were not sent to throw the Articles of Confederation in the garbage and in secret conclave write an entirely new document, which is exactly what they did.
Exactly.
It was a coup. By any fair reading, it was a coup.
Exactly.
And we're very fortunate that there were men like George Mason who absolutely insisted that there had to be a Bill of Rights. That was not originally part of the Constitution that they came up with.
Yeah.
But they were so concerned about the open-ended language and the centralization of power that was implicit in the language. And remember, Hamilton was a smart guy. He was a lawyer. These guys are Sharpies. They choose words very, very judiciously. They're not dumb. Right. So when they put in clauses like necessary and proper and general welfare, they understood exactly what they were doing, which was giving wiggle room so that in the future these could be interpreted to allow unlimited federal authority. They knew exactly what they were doing.
Yeah, absolutely right. I'll never forget when a former congressman, I was in this like backroom meeting with Republicans in New Hampshire, and they're talking about, well, what do we do in this legislation to do this or do that in the State House? And this former congressman says, well, just put in the word reasonable. That's a wiggle room word. And the government determines what is reasonable. I was like,
you're right.
It just blew my mind. Well, Eric,
a non-lawyer, an ordinary person who hears that word, the assumption is, well, I know what reasonable is. That's reasonable. I like reasonable.
I'm in charge. I'm in charge. That's all. And it is Humpty Dumpty. All that matters is who is in charge. That's all.
Safety is another one. What does that mean? Who gets to define what safe is?
In fact, in the next segment, I'm gonna display something from Ron Paul and Danny McAdams talking about Lindsey Graham's sister, because I think it's a great small video lesson on the term national security. And it'll be good. Hopefully, I'll get your thoughts on that next week. But before we go, Eric, I did mention this to you. I want to ask you a quick question, and I hope people go to the store. Go to the store. If I can convince maybe one or two more people, head over to Eric Peters Autos and get the gear. That'd be great. That would be fantastic. So, Eric, let me ask you: if you were to be approached by somebody to say, "Hey, give me an idea of your favorite, one of your favorite short stories or favorite books that you read in your life, either as a kid or an adult," what might you mention to them as we head out as something to say?
Boy, that's a hard one because there's so many, and I guess I have a penchant for stories about retribution. And so I'm a huge fan of Edgar Allan Poe, and therefore I really like The Cask of Amontillado. Remember that one?
Yeah.
That's one of my favorites. And I'm not going to, there are many others that we can talk about at another time. And I love the Poe was a master of prose, and the way he would create a scene and the words that he would choose, just it is lip smacking, finger licking good to read that stuff. At least it is for me.
I like it. He's the Kentucky Fried Chicken of prose. Eric, thank you, my man. Great to talk to you. You make a lot of sense. And let me just check to make sure if I've missed any messages or questions to Eric. Anybody wants to bring these up? If I've missed anything, just put them back in there in the next couple seconds, and we will. Yes, I wish I had my hot rod Lincoln right now. That'd be awesome. I'll go with the souped-up Volkswagen Beetles that my friends the Leaches used to do. Those things were amazing. They were so awesome. All right. It's not reasonable to, let's see. Oh, yes. X Sweets X. Thank you for doing that. She just put the link up to your website inside the chat because that's awesome. Angelo 1999 says, what does Eric think of the 1998 Land Rover Discovery 1, I guess, or Discovery?
It's cool. I love it. It's unlike the current ones. It's slow and it's a little tipsy-topsy, if you're stupid enough to take it around a high-speed corner. But if you're actually going to use it for what it was designed to do, it's brilliant. And it's very rugged and very durable. I can't remember. I think back then you could still get a diesel in it. If not, it also had the ancient but tried and true aluminum V8 that Land Rover bought from General Motors, that they designed back in the 60s. And it was just, I remember test driving those things when they were new. Great vehicles.
Awesome. So it's got a little high center of gravity, but it's still pretty rugged.
Yeah, just don't be dumb. I mean, people, you don't take a Corvette off-roading, do you?
Right.
And
Right.
this idea of trying to make these 4x4 SUVs corner like sports cars, it makes my teeth ache.
Angela says it is slow, 35 uphill. I guess
Yeah.
it depends on the grade, but yeah, that's so right. So right. All right. Thanks, guys. Inside chat. And thanks, Eric, man. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Art.
You know, I've been sort of on my own taking care of the kitty cat here. And boy, and X Sweets X says, great show, guard. And thank you, X. I really appreciate that. Eric, live long and prosper. I've got something I'm going to send you, an audio story that I think you might like.
Okay.
Seeing that you like the Poe thing, I think you might dig this. So I'll send it over to you when I get the chance.
Cool.
All
And
right,
I'm going to dig up the Omega Glory and watch that again tonight.
That's right. That's right. We'll go. I got to wear my Star Trek pin next time you're on. We're going to go Omega Glory all the way.
Cool.
All right, man. Live long and prosper, brother.
Likewise, guard.
All right. Keep your eyes peeled. We'll talk to you soon. Eric Peters, everybody. EricPetersAutos.com. Remember him. He is a good man. And we will return after we hear from Kirk and Spock and McCoy and the whole gang. And the Liberty Conspiracy Mind Meld base comes at us.